mentioned at the outset that we were going to talk about health. And we have a fantastic company coming to talk to us, Selio Medical. And lung cancer is the most common cancer worldwide. And our next guest is reimagining how that early intervention and diagnosis will make a significant difference in that particular issue. We're delighted to be joined by Colin Mcgarvey of Selio Medical, who's in conversation with Michael Culligan.
Thank you very much, Conor, and Colin, good morning. Welcome to us, although you didn't have very far to come up from downstairs. I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to sit down, I suppose, in conversation with you this morning for hopefully the next 20 minutes, and perhaps try and share with our audience out here this morning who are early stage and scaling companies, your story. I'm always interested in the person behind it, and people will be familiar with me referring to the term resilience when it comes to entrepreneurship. So as I sit looking across at a Tyrone man, I'm sure there's buckets of resilience. Say a little bit perhaps about your own background and perhaps where the entrepreneurial gene came from, even before we get to your specific current.
Sure, Michael, look, great to be here. Thank you very much for the invite and delighted to share our story. Personally, from my perspective, I guess I probably blame my mother. I was born with an entrepreneurial gene. She was in business, had numerous businesses over the years, and from a very early stage we would have been in those businesses and seeing what was going on. So afterwards, beyond that, Michael, I guess I took myself off to university and did a degree in pharmacy. Worked as a pharmacist in the retail pharmacy sector. I got, I guess, a little bit tired of working as a pharmacist, and the entrepreneurial and business gene was always there, and got into the business side of retail pharmacy very quickly. And then I decided to take myself off to business school. Came back and worked again in retail pharmacy, working in corporate business development and mergers and acquisitions, and gave me a real taste for the larger corporate
You've been putting layers and layers of learning all the way along. Just before you head off to that, back to Tyrone for a moment, one of the companies that always sticks in my mind when I think of entrepreneurship is a company called PowerScreen.
Yes, indeed.
Who started in heavy engineering in Tyrone, and products are all around the world in 80 or 100 countries. And the number of companies, startup companies that evolve from people who started working in that. True. Is that something you would have been conscious of or aware of? Or?
Oh, very much so. As you say, Michael, like PowerScreen were a famous company in Tyrone, and everyone in Tyrone very proud of it. And there were multiple companies evolved out of PowerScreen, and very much aware of that. I guess during that boom time for PowerScreen, I myself was in Dublin, but was very conscious of what was happening in Tyrone for sure. And out of that, I think there has been a heavy engineering and actually an engineering ecosystem developed in Tyrone through that.
Yeah, it's something phenomenal and world class. So back to yourself then, you got into business development, having gone to business school, so I guess that was in the medical device area with large corporates. Did you say in M&A, or were you actually doing business development, or say?
It was M&A with large corporates within the retail pharmacy sector. So I was responsible initially for building out the largest retail pharmacy chain in Ireland, which was called Unicare. We then got acquired, and I worked with the acquirer then in Europe on more M&A and business development, right, on bricks and mortar and retail pharmacy.
Is that a German company?
It was indeed, originally called GEHA,
Yes. So you had this entrepreneurial gene in your bag, carrying with you all the way along, and from the early days, which is hugely important. So take us on then, I guess, to the genesis of what is today Selio Medical, and yourself and Garrett, I guess.
Sure, for sure. So I guess I had worked for 25 odd years in commercial and business roles in the corporate world, and through all that I always had a desire to have my own business. And coming towards the end of that, I decided it would be in medical devices. And I spoke to a lot of people in the medical device sector, both in Ireland and Europe and the US, through various networks. And I guess the resounding feedback I was getting was, if you wanted to get into medical devices in Ireland, there's only one show in town, and that's going to the BioInnovate Fellowship.
Correct.
So I applied and was delighted to get accepted. And I guess two very important things happened during that fellowship that I joined. The first one was that I met my co-founder now, Garrett Ryan. During that program, we were just put on the same team. And secondly, we then identified this large unmet clinical need while we were in the hospital environment observing clinical procedures. And it was through that we saw the problem of pneumothorax, a collapsed lung occurring. And we decided, look, we could possibly come up with an idea to prevent this. And that was the genesis of it. It was all during BioInnovate.
On mentioning BioInnovate, I won't let it pass. I may have mentioned it before to some of the people in the audience here, but the godfather of BioInnovate in Ireland was Ian Quinn, R.I.P. Ian passed away unfortunately about a year ago after a long hard-fought illness. But Ian was the founder, for people who mightn't be familiar, of Craigana Devices, one of the, I suppose, the leading companies in the medical device area in Ireland. And he's the guy who brought BioInnovate from Stanford to Ireland. And in the same way that we spoke about PowerScreen and the legacy of that, I think we are seeing the same thing emerging now with BioInnovate. Back to your, R.I.P. Ian, back to yourself then. The problem that you were addressing, which you saw, I guess, when you were in one of the hospitals, talk about, when the moment was, you realized this was really a serious, big problem that we could impact, I suppose.
Sure. So part of the BioInnovate Fellowship, and one of the key cornerstones of it, is that you actually spend 4 to 5 months in a hospital with clinicians observing their procedures in a specific medical area. So we were focusing on respiratory medicine and observing all procedures to do with the chest and the heart and the lungs. And one day we were in the intervention radiology suite in Cork University Hospital. There was an elderly gentleman was booked in to have a lung biopsy procedure, which is sort of a very common outpatient procedure for the diagnosis of lung problems, mostly lung cancer actually. And he'd been asked to sign a waiver to say there are complications with this procedure. And he was quite nervous about a potential lung cancer diagnosis. But unfortunately, as we observed the procedure, he did suffer from a common and dangerous complication, which was a collapsed lung. So to do a lung biopsy, you have to place a needle within the lung percutaneously across the skin. And it's like placing a needle in an inflated balloon. Once you remove that needle, air can leak out of that balloon. And the same happens in our lungs, unfortunately. So this gentleman did suffer a collapsed lung due to having a lung biopsy procedure. And what was the output of that? It meant that he actually had to be admitted into the hospital. They had to find a bed for him. And he had to have quite an invasive treatment to try and solve that complication. So he thought, like, that has significant knock-on effects on the patient himself, on the clinician and the healthcare staff, and also on the hospital.
The resources in the hospital.
Exactly. And from a health economic perspective, it was adding significant cost to the entire ecosystem. So we thought, look, we spoke to the clinician who conducted the procedure and asked him, how common is this? Is this really rare, or is it quite common? He said, look, actually it occurs in about 1 in 3 patients.
Wow.
So we were astounded about the occurrence rate and thought, like, for such a common outpatient procedure where the patient should come into hospital and go home on the same day, to end up in hospital for a week and for it to happen so commonly, we thought there must be hopefully a better way of doing that. So we put our heads together and came up with what we thought would be, a way of actually facilitating clinicians to do these procedures without this complication actually occurring. And that was the start of it. So the remainder of the BioInnovate Fellowship, we were researching the competitive landscape and IP and potential routes to market and what the size of that market might have been. And coming to then at the actual end of the program, we thought, look, we've got an idea here. There's a market opportunity. We started to validate with potential users, if this problem was big enough and there was a potential solution for it, would they use it? And we were getting very positive feedback on that. So that encouraged us then to look for some initial seed funding to actually commence some R&D and to develop a device and to get the entire project started.
And just before we move on in that story and how you've moved it along, Conor mentioned at the outset, how common, I guess, lung cancer is. You give a sense in terms of the scale of the problem you're addressing, the number of people worldwide who have a collapsed lung each year.
Sure. So to help you with that, there are over 1.5 million lung biopsy procedures conducted globally every year. And there's about a third of those are actually suffering this complication. So it gives a market opportunity for a device like ours to solve this problem in excess of $500 million effectively. So it's a sizable market.
It certainly is. It certainly is. So you had there was a problem. It was a big problem. You could see a route towards a solution. So then you're back in the usual journey of trying to find a little bit of money to help seed you in the early stages.
Exactly.
So just touch on that a little bit. I know you've moved a long way from that now, but nevertheless, those early stages, stages are critical.
They were.
To get to here.
And that was back in 2015, 2016. I guess we were lucky that the BioInnovate program, that was the second or third year of it. So some people had been there before. They had gone down certain routes to try and get some initial funding. So we had the benefit of learning from their experiences. And I took advantage of that and spoke to as many many people as possible. And the advice I was getting, that Enterprise Ireland, who are actually sponsoring the BioIndia program, offer a very effective and attractive method of initial funding, which is commercialization funding. So we applied to Enterprise Ireland for the COM fund and put together a business plan for what we intended to do with that money, and we were delighted to get it. So once we had that money, that enabled us, that COM fund must be spent within a third level institute. So we had a decision to make where we would go, and Garrett had some very good contacts in Trinity College with Professor Bruce Murphy, who ran the medical device lab. So we made a decision to effectively spin into Trinity College, and with the funding granted through the COM fund, we commenced making prototypes, testing them, and all the other commercial and regulatory and IP aspects of the project.
And sorry, actually, just before I ask you, just to shout out to people out there, please do get your questions in. We will have time for Q&A after, so if you have questions for Colin, please do send them in. So how was that process then within the working with the college? How did that work in the early days in terms of helping you to advance? Were you able to access resources within the college, etc.?
We were. It was a very supportive network. It was actually a fantastic place to be. There were a number of other startup medical device companies actually in the same lab who were probably a year, maybe 2 years ahead of us. So it was a great ecosystem to be part of. So we had the benefit of our peers there effectively. We also had the benefit of all the expert knowledge right throughout the college. We got great support from anatomy labs and pharmacology labs and the Department of Medicine. So fantastic support. Right.
Were you on the main campus or in Open James?
We were on the main campus, in TBSI, it's called, the Trinity Biomedical Science Institute.
So you used your COM funding then, made further progress, I imagine, and you needed more fuel in the tank, I think, to take it on further. So what next, I guess, in terms of the next stage?
Yeah, we certainly did. So I guess that lasted us probably about 2 years, Michael. So we were looking at, okay, what's the next steps here for getting some further funding? And we applied to, I guess you would describe it as a number of startup facilitating programs, the likes of MedTech Innovator, NSF I-Core, and EIT Health. So these were all accelerator programs, very much designed for medical device startups. So we applied to those three, and we were delighted to be successful in the three of them. I guess the first one was EIT Health, and that enabled us to get some non-dilutive grant funding of about, I think it was 50,000 at the time, which kept us going as the COM fund was coming to an end, and give us a bit of breathing space then to apply to others, which we did, and were successful in 2 others as well.
You mentioned the NSF I-Core there, that's National Science Foundation in the United States of America, run by Science Foundation Ireland. I've heard of that.
It was a fantastic partnership between SFI and Ireland, as you say, and NSF in the United States. And we were the first Irish project to be accepted onto that NSF I-Core program. We did that accelerator program in Georgia Tech in Atlanta. And I would support anyone who's at an early stage of validating a device for a startup to look at how that is done and even to join that program, because it forced us, and I mean force, it really did force us, every week to conduct 20 interviews with end users of our product, and really helped us to validate that there's a need there and the size of that.
And that's why I wanted to draw it out a little bit. I have some familiarity with it from Stephen O'Driscoll and his colleagues at Science Foundation Ireland, who have led that program within SF. And what I particularly like about it is just what you've said, people are forced out of their comfort zones big time in the American way, and if you can come through that, so
it does. It opened a lot of doors for us, Michael. There was some further funding as part of that program, which we used to great advantage, enabled us to visit, I would say, probably 20 of the largest hospitals in the United States, and to get to speak to end users who were conducting the procedure we were interested in. So that we were able to observe their procedures, got to meet these guys, ask them about the problems that they were observing, and to get their feedback on our potential solution to that problem. And we
proper deep research.
Oh, for sure. And we anticipate that those will be some of the early adopters of our technology as we get regulatory approval and get on the market.
And then you got some larger funding, I think, in a little bit on that to allow you to take to where you are now.
Exactly.
Just touch briefly on the larger funding, and then we might get to where you are now with it.
Yeah, for sure. So we were lucky to get 3 tranches of non-dilutive grant funding through those accelerator programs. That allowed us to validate the technology that we had. So we had some very, very strong proof of concept data in suitable models to show that this device actually is safe and effective. And that enabled us to convince one large medical device corporate to make a sizable investment in the company, which was fantastic. And we raised, between that and further grant funding from EIT Health, we were able to raise over €5 million at that stage. So that was a fantastic.
Game-changing, really, I think.
It was.
Yeah.
Like at that stage, the team was still 2 people.
Yeah.
We were using outsourced consultants. We were on a shoestring. We were very much bootstrapping, as in where if we needed a consultant, we'd reach out to them. But that allowed us then to look for a new base and also to expand our team.
What's really interesting about listening to your journey there is, you punched so well and so hard with retaining the majority of your equity by finding, really serious value add programs and things that helped you and got more than the money, I think, a little bit. But then you got your money, and obviously that allowed you then to consider building out a team, which is what you've been doing for the last few years here in the Guinness Enterprise Centre with ourselves.
It is indeed. So
you might maybe share with the audience then where you've now got to in terms of a little bit on the team, but in particular, I know that you're trialing the product at this stage internationally in France and also in
Exactly.
Ireland.
Yeah, so we looked around the city. It was Dublin we wanted to be based in still, and we looked around for suitable premises for our company at our stage of growth. And the Guinness Enterprise Centre met all our requirements and more. Fantastic new facility here, and we've taken 2 suites here. In one, we have fitted out a clean room for a manufacturing facility, a bespoke manufacturing facility for one element of our medical device. And in another suite, we have a large office facility for our team. So the team has now grown from what was the 2 co-founders, myself and Garrett, to a team now of 10 and soon to be 11 people. And that's made up of quite a heavy R&D medical device engineer, but also regulatory support, quality support, and clinical affairs support. So
that's fantastic. And back to my opening comments this morning with regard to innovation, we're referring to companies like yours, this subset of companies who are creating these really high quality jobs. The kind of people you have on board there are extremely well qualified in different verticals, and
very much so,
which is what you need now, obviously, to deliver on the opportunities.
Sure.
Talk a little bit about where you're at then on the back of these resources and where the product has got to, and with market engagement, perhaps.
For sure. So the next stage for any medical device to get on the market is to get regulatory approval for your class of medical device. So we're very much pointed towards the US market initially. There's a number of reasons for that. It's the largest market opportunity for ourselves, and it also has the lowest regulatory hurdle, believe it or not, compared to Europe. So we're going to the US initially, and obviously to get on the market in the US, we must have FDA approval for that device. And we've had numerous meetings with the FDA. They mandate, the testing that they expect and the results that they would expect to see to adjudicate on that approval. So the funding and the growth of the team has all been around conducting the necessary testing and developing the data that we're going to submit to the FDA in the first quarter of next year to support our FDA application for approval in the US market. And part of that has been numerous studies that we have conducted in international markets. And we've done some studies in Belgium, some in France, and some in Holland as well. And we've been moving on. We've now a strong allegiance with our neighbours here in St. James's Hospital, where we've commenced a standard of care clinical study. And we'll be soon starting a first-in-man study and subsequently next year, both in St. James's Hospital and a number of other centres across Europe.
Fantastic. And actually, on a connected note, it was fantastic. Recently, we had a visit during President Macron's visit. We had Bruno Le Maire, as you know well, French finance minister, visited GEC, and in meeting with yourselves as one of the companies, for you to be able to talk about, testing your products in some of the major French hospitals was really brilliant. That time frame for FDA approval, I mean, it's a fairly well-known route, but it doesn't make it any less difficult, and it's such I suppose, a value inflection point as the language might go a little bit. So, have you people on the team now with expertise in that area to help not make the mistakes that you might otherwise make?
Yeah, one of the key hires for the company was somebody with expertise in regulatory affairs who'd worked with other companies to bring medical devices of our classification onto the market through FDA approval. So we're delighted to have that resource there. And they're supporting us through that submission process, and they've been there before, they've seen it, and facilitated the meetings that we've had both face-to-face and virtually with the FDA over this last 2 years along that journey.
And quickly, was that impacted in any way by the pandemic in terms of the time and engaging and all that, or reasonably okay?
I guess we were lucky that we kicked it off before the pandemic had actually started, Michael. We had our first number of face-to-face meetings before COVID was even talked about, which was great from our perspective. But subsequently, because we had the first face-to-face, we developed the relationships. They've been very accommodating with virtual meetings by video or telephone since that. So
good. I see a quick question coming in, so I might just take it for a second. Colin is asking us here on the, did you have many refusals of funding initially? And if so, why? I'm smiling as the question question comes in. I used to do a bit of lecturing in Smurfit School many years ago. One of the case studies I used to use was Starbucks, and it always started off with the guy saying that he pitched to 243 people and was turned down by 225. But I'm not sure if it was that difficult.
Well, I was going to say the same thing myself, Michael. To answer the question, we certainly had more no's than we had yeses.
Of course.
And what did that teach me? I guess it taught me that I might have been asking the wrong people in the wrong places, potentially. And we started to narrow our focus to look at, where we go with this product, who could potentially help us with distribution, who's got similar products in the market, who would understand what we're doing, where we're trying to get to, and would have a more nuanced understanding of the investment required and the potential return for that. And when we went down a more filtered route, then the answers were starting to turn from no to maybes and yeses, which was
so
good.
that's more the strategic route, I suppose. Go the route of strategic partners who.
I guess it went from more of a shotgun approach to more of a laser sniper.
It's very. We could talk on this all day. Actually, we've gone through our own journey at Dublin Business Innovation Centre and raising a new seed Series A venture fund. And I remember talking to somebody about that in the early days when we were fundraising. We have a lot of privates in the fund, and the chap said to me, he says it's all about quantity, and I actually said no, it's all about quality. But when I'd finished the process, anyway, a couple of years later, it's actually about both. I think in terms of your pipeline needs to be broad at the start, and then maybe you refine a little bit.
I guess one other point, Michael, just to help on that, we were lucky. We did arrive in a situation where we actually did have a number of offers to choose from for funding at that stage, and we had to make a decision as to, fair enough, we can get the same money from different routes, but actually, to your point, which of them is actually going to bring most value to us on the board of our company, and that was one of the key decision factors.
Thanks very much for coming back in on that. Hugely important. Obviously, everybody thinks the only thing they're missing is money, but there's a whole range of other things, and actually the development of your board is phenomenally important in the journey. We have some more questions which we'll pick up in a second, but I do want to ask you in terms of where you're at now and looking ahead, I suppose, for Garrett, your co-founder, yourself, and this super team you're putting together. And we're thrilled to have you here in the GEC because we think there's an opportunity to build out a whole, healthcare, medical device, and digital health sort of hub within the larger GEC itself. But your ambition for the company now, in looking ahead, I know you're a very determined chap, as a slight understatement, still winning national mountain bike races and all sorts of things, which we don't have time to go into today. But it's relevant in terms of resilience. So your ambition for Selio Medical looking to the future now.
Sure. Thank you, Michael. I guess the next key milestone for ourselves is to get regulatory approval and get our device on the market in the US and get early adopters using it, get in the hands of clinicians to benefit patients. But longer term, we see our device, our first device, being the gold standard of care for clinicians conducting lung biopsies and for lung cancer diagnosis. The technology itself is a platform technology, and at this stage we have very strong ideas about other potential indications for this platform technology and where we can take it. So that will be the next stage of the development. Get the device on the market in the US, subsequently in Europe, and look at other international markets. And in tandem with that, then continue with further R&D around other indications for the platform technology.
It's great to hear it's a platform technology because that provides other opportunities, you say, into the future. Can I ask you sort of a related question there in terms of building out your team now, because it's all about people ultimately. The fact that you're involved in an area with such opportunity for serious impact, on people's lives, etc., is that a factor, and to what level when you're hiring people?
I guess it's a motivating factor for people. We've met some fantastic people, and we've got a fantastic team. We wouldn't be where we are apart from the team that we have, the team who drive it. But that was a big motivating factor for all the team. They saw within this a technology that will make a big difference in people's lives, make a big difference in the healthcare system. And that in itself was fantastic. And people are motivated by that every day.
Superb. I'm just keeping an eye on time. I think we're more or less up. Have I got a couple of minutes for? Yeah, we have a few minutes for Q&A and to round it out. Question popping up here, maybe it's a little bit different. This one there isn't a name on it now, but would you recommend merging as a means to grow your at a startup stage? Especially if it involves engaging with a competitor is the question.
What's the best way to answer that question, Michael? I guess what I would say to that is that at an early stage, we did, and I would consider all potential opportunities. And see where you go, see where it will bring you. What are the pros? What are the cons? And what are the risks? And what are the benefits? there certainly are benefits emerging with a competitor.
Yeah.
You can make yourself stronger. You can take one competitor out of the market if you're there together. So yeah, I certainly wouldn't be against it.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good answer there. It's hard to know the dividends in the detail, but I suppose never say no at the start.
No, definitely not.
Keep your options open. You don't have to execute on them. The kind of time frame for the first in man you referred to, and moving beyond that, just briefly for the audience here. You know, so first in man is a trial of so many people that you'll test you'll test a solution in, but then the broad rollout into the market, subject to successful FDA and first in man. What timescales are we looking at there? Because obviously the duration period in the medical device world is quite long, of course.
It is. So I guess to help with that, I guess we've been preparing for a first-in-man study. It does take a lot of preparation. You require significant approvals, both ethical and regulatory, to test a new device, obviously in humans. That preparation stage has taken, we've probably spent 18 months of that at this stage. To actually conduct our study is going to take in the region of 6 to 9 months. And subsequent to that, we'll need that data for our CE marking. That process after submission can be anything from 3 to 9 months.
Yeah, a couple of years kind of time frame.
It is.
To make our way through it overall. Okay, very quick question here. Not sure if I think your 3 programs were a little bit different, but the question is, at what stage did you stop applying for grants and competitions? You know, the comment here is those resources can be great, but a lot of the programs can have a level of maybe overlap and tie up your resources, etc. Any comment on that? And I can see where the question is coming from, although I think the quality of the ones you were on were a little different. Any comment on that?
I guess we did apply to 3 we felt were market-leading international accelerator programs, very much pointed at medical device, which not only did they give grant funding, but they provided a fantastic network of people and advisors, some of which who we are still using consistently. So there were some overlap on some of those. I guess what we did the BioInnovate program, which in itself was an accelerator program. We did 3 subsequently, and we chose those 3 for the reasons I mentioned, including the funding that was there. By the end of effectively the 4th one, I was pretty sure we'd done enough. But the key point was we then had generated data which would give confidence to investors to say we're in a position to have some serious conversations with you. So I think that might answer the question. You know, you can do as many accelerator programs as you want, but you have to have an end point to say, okay, this is going to get me to the next point and enable me to raise further funding.
Superb, Colin. I guess just in terms of wrapping up at where we're at, I always ask people like yourselves who, you know, I have so much admiration for, because we opened this morning by talking about the innovators and the entrepreneurs, and it's guys like Garrett and yourself who are building these scaling companies who will provide these high quality jobs, find solutions in telehealthcare, whatever it might be, you know, and Ireland Inc. obviously needs so much of this indigenous entrepreneurship. And your one is fantastic. You know, you've had a proper look around the world, you're competing globally. My question to you is, how do you think Ireland is doing overall in this entrepreneurial innovation area? You've sort of been observing for the past number of years now. And where do you think we're at in that regard? Bar keeps getting higher and higher internationally, obviously, all the time.
It's a good question, Michael. I guess my experience is fundamentally health and medical device related, so I can speak more clearly with regards to that. And I would say we're very much punching above our weight with regards to the size of our country. If you look at the number of large medical device corporates who are in Ireland, we're punching above our weight there already. Out of the lab that we spun out of in Trinity College, there are 3 further medical device startup companies have evolved out of that, who have grown significant teams and are doing fantastic work. So if you look at that, I would say we're doing exceptionally well. There's a great network in the country, and people are very, very helpful.
And I think you've hit the nail on the head a little bit there. I suppose that vertical of medical devices and healthcare is particularly strong, and there's a whole broader ecosystem around. We could talk all day, but my colleague Emma is encouraging me to stop talking. Colin, absolute pleasure to sit down and have an exchange of information. I hope for folks out there, you know, hearing Colin and Garrett's story with Selio Medical is inspiring for you as it is for me. We wish Colin and his colleagues the very, very best on this, superb platform technology, and I'm sure we'll hear an awful lot more on it.